Ah, hello everybody. Um, Welcome back to some of you. Welcome to some of you. This is our recurring caregiver series, recurring caregiver webinar. So a lot of the content. So the way these things work, guys, is I start us off with some basic slides, level set, and then the real action is the dialogue with you guys, with conversation, questions, comments, anything. Reminder, these webinars are meant to be safe places to say and feel just about anything. You're not pressured to say anything or participate per se. Listening is plenty, but you're certainly encouraged to. And there are, I just hate to sound like our school marms, but there are no dumb questions. There are no bad questions, really, especially in this odyssey of caregiving. It's such a unintuitive place in some ways, and a super deeply intuitive place in other ways. So anything goes, guys. There will be redundancies in the slides for those of you who've been here before, but again, that's just to make sure we really have the basics in mind before we jump into the conversation. So, well, let me just say, this one's particularly pointed for me. I just no worries, I'm all fine. But I did just get out of the hospital after a kind of a surprise surgery on my leg. Something had been going on there for a while and came to a head, and I found myself 1 minute sitting here, 1 minute in the ER, next in an OR, and away I went. And all is fine. I'm home, well, but just to say, I'm really extra aware of how much we need each other. I would not have gotten through this very simple, relatively speaking, very simple surgery, non-crazy, non-life-threatening, but still, I needed a lot of support from people like Sonia and others here on the ground. Thank you, Sonia. And then a lot of help from professional caregivers. So nurses, aides, folks who rigged my little knee scooter up really quickly so I could get out of the hospital safely, the folks at the prosthetics department at UCSF. I mean, all sorts of people jump to. My roommate was an amazing addition to the mix. So anyway, just a big shout out of thanks from me, but also just a reminder of this is not things that other people do. These are things that we do. These are things that are necessary. These are things that go unseen, unspoken, unappreciated in so many ways. And there's so many people involved helping me get through this week. So anyway, just a case in point for all of us. I'm sure we all have examples. Okay, with that, over to you, Sonia.
Thanks, BJ. And it is my honor and pleasure to act as your caregiver whenever you need it. So everyone, just a quick FYI on how you can interact with us after BJ's gone through these slides. You can raise your hand, you can push the little raise hand button and ask your question out loud. Or if you prefer to not speak out loud, you can type it into the question area and I will read it out for you to have BJ answer. And another note about typing the question, if you would prefer to remain anonymous, that's no problem at all. Please just let me know when you type in the question and I will be sure to not mention your name. That's no problem at all. We want this to be a safe space for you. So if that's what feels safe, then that's great for us. And another quick note, if we're not able to get to everyone's questions during this hour, we will record another session to answer any questions that are left over. So please know if we don't get to it in this session, we will make sure to get to it later and answer your questions. Thanks again for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, so, all right. One thing to know about caregiving is like a lot of activities that are energy consuming, one way or another, is to get a sense of timing. And this may, when I say time, this may mean prognosis. So if we're settling into a caregiver role for someone with whom we live, that's one thing. If it's a friend or distant relative, or involved, more tangentially or remotely. I mean, there are various shades of gray here of different levels of intensity and over longer periods of time or different periods of time. So, again, I think I started to say, if you're caregiving for someone, say, with dementia, well, you're likely in for many years on average. Whereas if you're signed up to caregive for someone who just had surgery and who will, to sort of a temporary setback, that the caregiving role may really last for a matter of days or weeks or months. And those are very different. Those are importantly different. The old marathon versus sprint thing holds here very well. You can't sprint through a marathon. So, if this is going to be a long road, settle on in. And make accommodations, change your life where you can, hold on to things where you can, and over time you'll find a rhythm. If it's more of a sprint, well, then in some ways you can kind of put the rest of your life on hold in some ways. Okay, I'll get back to this or that thing in a week or two when we're through these woods. So very different valence, very different energy. All of the above are helpful, useful. So, but just a way to sort of check in for what you're signing up for here. Because a different energy is required. I will say also on that, acute versus chronic things, as a patient, acute versus chronic issues require very different energy. Same it goes with caregiving. Gosh, where was I going with that? Anyway, thought I had another point. Maybe we'll circle back. Maybe not. I'm probably still leaking anesthesia over here, so bear with me. I will try not to milk this too much. Anyway, okay. So ADLs, activities of daily living. This is a phrase worth knowing. You will hear it because it has a lot of the words in medicine have vernacular meanings and professional, and specific industry meanings. And ADLs though it does have a specific meaning, especially relevant in the medical and the world of the insurance providers, because a lot of your services of what's covered, like home care, for example, will depend on an evaluation of where you are dependent or independent on your ADLs. So these are 6 categories that are routinized, and especially if you're a professional caregiver like a CNA or a home health aide, these are very much your bread and butter, these issues. So this is the stuff to kind of get through an average day as a modern human being. So they include things like bathing, not to be underestimated. That is not a nicety. A lot of us will tell you who have been in hospitals or have been sick, bathing it really is akin to godliness on some level, and it can make all the difference in one's mood. So bathing, huge, very important issue, both just in terms of hygiene, but also care and attention to the aesthetic plane and feeling right in the world. Very, very key. Dressing, of course, too. All of these really fit that same bill. Dressing, okay, getting on and off clothes, on and off. Eating, getting food from a refrigerator to a stove to a plate to a mouth to a belly, etc. We'll get to the etc. in a second, but is really key. I don't need to tell you. Transferring and moving, that is, so moving from the bed to seating position, from seating position to standing or walking, depending on what the capability is here. There's always some need for moving one's body in space. It may be that if someone who is completely is in bed all day, rotating, moving within the bed can be very, very important to keep bed sores at bay, for example. Toileting, well, here's the etc. part to the eating, so that we need to follow the food all the way through. And toileting is extremely important. Constipation is very common, diarrhea is very common, and both are problematic and need attention. And getting to and from a bathroom is not easy. Bedside commodes, bedpans can be very, very helpful. And you need to figure out how to use them wisely. Continence, big deal. So one ability to hold one's urine or bowels, those are some of the first things to go in various courses of illness and can be problematic and scary and difficult for the patient for sure, and as well as the caregiver, and really need attention. So those are 6 ADLs. One can be either dependent or independent of their ADLs. Independent meaning I can bathe myself, I can toilet myself, but I can't quite dress or eat or move, so I'd be independent in 2 of my ADLs, for example. All right, and again, the reason to think about this are the mechanics of a lot of caregiving roles, but it's also their implications for the insurance status and what services you'll qualify for. So a big thing that happens in a caregiving dynamic is Well, it is its own dynamic, caregiving, care receiving. And a lot of folks, a lot of folks on this call, a lot of folks who are technically fit the bill as caregivers, don't identify as caregivers. I mean, in some ways, I grew up a caregiver. I have a mother who deals with disability, and I was always down, and it was a big part of our dynamic. We helped each other. I suppose in retrospect, I was something of a caregiver. Never felt like that. I was my mom's son, and I think a lot of us feel this way. I'm not a caregiver. I'm a spouse or a friend um, and so there's no need to belabor this title. You don't need to necessarily take it on or not. But do note that when someone is really relying upon you, not just delighting in you, but relying upon you for certain things, it does change the dynamic. So certainly this happens oftentimes in romantic relationships, partnerships, marriages, that after many years of certain patterns and rhythms together and certain amounts of independence from each other, a lot of that can change when someone is sick or disabled or nearing the end of life. And these roles do put different pressures on a relationship, and it's really worth noting because I think a lot of us would just say, "No, I'm just spouse or I'm just son." Um, if you're not careful, you keep trying to hold your energy level and your expectations to that role of being spouse or son, even that's changing. So one way or another, I think it's important to acknowledge that these roles put different stresses, different pressures on a dynamic between two people. It can be incredibly powerfully, beautiful too. I mean, it's when you're signing for caregiving, you're signing for a lot of hard stuff. You're signing up for a lot of beauty too, and intimacy and vulnerability, and all sorts of gorgeous stuff flows from it. But it ain't easy, and it can crowd other things out. So it's, again, I want us to just give ourselves some space and credit and time to accommodate all these changes, hence the naming of them. So one thing, especially these days, I think if a lot of us are holding ourselves to stories of prior generations, well, be careful. Medicine has advanced to the point where a lot of us are able to survive things that would have killed us a generation ago. And we're able to live much more. We may not be able to cure a lot of chronic illnesses by definition. Chronic illness is not curable, generally speaking, but we can now live with things, with diagnoses. We can manage diagnoses. A big example of this would be HIV. It used to be an absolute terminal illness, is now a manageable chronic illness for most people with proper medications. Heart failure, any end organ failure used to be much more quickly fatal. Now many of us can live for years in these conditions. And that's wonderful news in so many ways, but it also means we're going to need help for a longer period of time. And this gets back to that marathon notion too. And part of this thing over time may be that as a condition changes over time, well, at some point you might need to bring in more help, whether that's neighborly help, or other friends marshaling other friends. Like the other day, just getting out of the hospital, coordinated between 3 different friends. A friend of mine who was at the house, a friend of mine who helped bring the Sonia, who helped bring the equipment to and fro, and another friend who helped spring me, actually physically take me out of the hospital to the parking garage. So anyway, there's a coordination of effort can be very, very important. Sometimes the primary caregiver becomes something of a manager. You're managing a bunch of other people who are helping, neighbors, friends, people from the same parish or whatever it may be. And of course, professional caregivers. A lot of us will end up needing to hire folks, home health aides, personal care attendants. These folks can be incredibly useful, can make such a difference in being able to stay at home safely and comfortably. They too will require management. The whole show needs management. And the other thing to note about here, I know a lot of us have this experience where if we're with the person who's in our care all the time or much of the time, you may not notice changes. But outside eyes, not just to help share the load, but outside eyes can be very helpful too to sort of give you for an assessment. If I'm living with someone and caregiving for them all the time, I may not notice changes, whereas a friend or a relative who comes in once a month may notice huge changes. So bringing in outside eyes just to get a relatively objective sense of what's going on. There may be time to call hospice here, or maybe time to call home health aides. A lot of us blow right past these lines if it's just left up to ourselves because we're so in the trench with someone. So these outside eyes can be very, very helpful in all sorts of ways. I would say one of the major, so there's all this stuff to do as a caregiver. But there's a lot of stuff to be as a caregiver in this role too, and not so much to do. It's sort of being with each other. It can be very, very powerful, very source of dignity, etc. Not just what do you need, what can I help with? That sort of endless question can be very helpful, but it's not like this whole thing isn't just sort of setting up a series of transactions, you might say. One of the most powerful things I think any of us can do for each other, this comes up a lot, is this thing called bearing witness, simply seeing and hearing each other. As I'm dealing with, say, with pain, it can feel so isolating, so alone. But if just one person sees me, sees what I'm going through, understands, even if they don't understand it, but they see it, they acknowledge it, they note what I'm going through, that is itself extremely therapeutic, even if there's nothing to be done. But I would say this is sort of about as elemental as it gets, as social animals as we are. Being witnessed in our life, not judged, but really just seen for whoever we are, whatever we're going through. Not squinting through, oh, I don't see disability, I don't see color, I don't see, no, let's see everything and be okay with it. That is extremely therapeutic and one of your jobs as a caregiver, I would say. Here comes Muffin Man to join us today, guys. Okay. Advocacy. So in some ways, these days, knowing, especially once you if you don't know already, but the healthcare system is amazing and pretty terrifying and counterintuitive, and there are a lot of gaps in it. So not all your needs are going to be filled by the doctor or doctor's team, not even by a long shot. Emotional, logistical needs, all sorts of existential issues come up. So there's sort of filling in the gaps that are left out in the healthcare system is one piece of this puzzle, but also advocating for your patient, for your person, to get the best care that is available, not confusing it with total care. You're not going to get total care in this system, I don't think. The closest thing might be hospice. So there is a role for advocacy. So when I'm frail and in pain and I can't necessarily, I'm hearing every fifth word that my doctor says. If I got a buddy with me at the doctor appointment, part of their role may be just listening on my behalf, asking questions on my behalf. It's a really powerful role. And in a way, this is advocacy, standing, sort of putting yourself in my shoes as the patient and working on my behalf on some level, asking the right questions, pushing doctors. What about this? What about that? Have you considered hospice? Why not hospice? All sorts of questions will come up. But I just want to sort of name this role because without it, you'll end up on these trajectories through the healthcare system, these sort of default modes in the healthcare system where a lot of us don't want to be. So it does take kind of constant questioning, some level of vigilance, although we should talk about that too. So, and one thing to say here, one of our community members brought up some good points about this idea, this role of advocacy. I mean, as I sit here talking about it, I can feel myself get kind of excited. It's fun to be an advocate or an activist even. It's empowering. There's something really juicy about it. And then there's the actual act of doing it. It's very difficult. So it's one thing to think in hypothetical or theoretical terms about this, but when push comes to shove and you're down in the dirt and a decision needs to be made, whether it's on treatment or anything else, with steep consequences, or at least a perception of consequences in every direction, it's very difficult. They're very difficult to make those decisions on our own behalf, let alone on somebody else's. So this is no joke. This is a muscle that for a lot of us takes some building. A lot of us may be naturally a little more deferential, especially within powerful structures like the medical system. Like doctor knows best, who am I to say? You can kind of talk yourself out of anything in these settings. So there really is a sort of a bucking up and a stepping into this role, and it ain't easy. It is empowering because it is powerful, and powerful roles come with responsibilities, and it's tricky. So just to name it here, we don't enter these things lightly. But I just also remembered what I was going to say earlier about this acute versus chronic thing. Another reason to kind of ponder the prognosis of the person you're caring for, the situation that you're caring for, is in the setting of chronic illness, again, by definition, that means it's not going to be cured. Almost by definition, the patient's going to get worse. When I say worse, it's physically, there will be physical decline. There can be emotional triumph and spiritual triumph, but physically, there's going to be decline. And the caregiving needs will change and go up. And the reason to mention this is in the setting of advocacy is a good advocate doesn't mean that your patient lives forever or somehow gets better or somehow beats cancer, whatever the heck that looks like. No, in some ways you're managing a decline. You're managing a landing of this big plane. And that's very important to note this, because that means if you're trying to gauge whether you're doing a good or bad job as a caregiver based on how well your person is doing, well, there will be plenty of things totally outside of your control. And the patient's going to get worse no matter how good a job you're doing, no matter how well you're advocating. There are going to be complications to procedures no matter how well you advocated, no matter how many questions you asked, etc. So getting a real part of the job here is, in terms of being there on behalf of somebody else, is being really there for yourself too, and being very clear with yourself to the degree you can, and be like, am I doing enough? Well, that's a hard question to answer. And again, you can't look around to gauge success or failure. Bed sores happen. That's not necessarily a failure in terms of if we're talking about advanced illness. So anyway, tricky. Lots to talk out here and lots to think through, and they're all situation dependent, so I can't put too fine a point on this, but be careful how you gauge your own success or failings in this role. Which gets, of course, lands us at self-care. This phrase came up when I was in training 20 years ago, or ish, 15, whatever it is. Has a kind of a novel idea, like, oh, caregivers, doctors, nurses, caregivers, family members, oh, we have to take care of ourselves too? Oh, isn't that novel? We had to remind ourselves that there's this thing called self-care. Seems kind of rudimentary and kind of silly, but it does get at where we are as a country. So we have this zero-sum, well, as a society, I don't mean as a country, as a people, but we have this sense that there's like a zero sum. I'm either here for you or I'm here for me. You're selfless or selfish. Those distinctions really fall away in this mode here, guys. So caregiving, care receiving is a big old loop. And in some ways, the most important thing for you to do for your own self-care is to do well by your patient. That is a source of a lot of pride and a lot of feeling well and feeling good about yourself, your own image. So it's not like self-care means, oh, today I'm going to forget about my person. I'm going to just care about me. It's not quite so simple as that. And those you'll learn that pretty quickly if you go down that road. It's bankrupt. It's a bankrupt route pretty quickly. So self-care is a flawed phrase, but for our purposes here, let's just note that we need to say it again and again. Your health, your well-being as a caregiver could not be more important. Again, even if you're the most trying to be or are the most altruistic person on the planet, your homework is still to take care of yourself, because you have to acknowledge you are a human being too. We all have to acknowledge this. So we have needs, and we have desires and we wants, we have interests in this life, and those are what get us through the day. Those only become more important. If I'm running on fumes as a caregiver, it's going to be very hard for me to do well by my person, even if that's my entire reason for living, my whole goal in life. So you're not going to get around this one. I'm sorry. You caregivers need to learn how to receive care yourselves. And believe me, I know that is a really tricky one. Healthcare is loaded with people who can give care but can't receive it, and that's a big, big problem. Okay, ooh, I knew I was going to do that. Okay, so let's pop out of slides, guys, and let's get to the fun stuff of conversation and questions. I'm going to turn off the slides real quick. Okay.
All right.
So, yeah.
We do have some questions that came in. I'll just start with this first one. This person said, my mom is a caretaker for her mom. What can she say, or what title does she need to have to be in all the rooms her mother goes into? She's being told she can't join in some, yet her mother is very forgetful and cannot communicate well to the doctor or to my mom, so they tend to run in drawn out circles.
Huh. Interesting. I wonder what the details of that, what those situations where somehow the person, your mom, is somehow discouraged from being there. I wonder what those, there are important moments, I will say, during an exam, say with a physician, where, especially if mental status is waning and a person is not necessarily able to speak so well for themselves, or maybe shy, or maybe fatigued or racked by treatments or whatever it is, it can be important, just generically speaking, do not take this personally, but it can be very important to have time with just the patient, the person, because sometimes when we're in front of other family members, we act one way, or we're trying to hold a brave face, or our family members can sort of hide things on our behalf. I don't mean this in a nefarious way, but also true too. I mean, I doubt that's true of anyone in this call, but there is such a thing as neglect and abuse, and this happens too. And some caregivers stray, and there can be pernicious activity. There can be family members who are doing this just for an inheritance or have some agenda about the person being alive or not alive. I mean, believe me, it sounds like we're talking about fiction TV here, but it gets gnarly out there, and doctors don't necessarily know how to suss this out. So for one reason or another, it can be important to have a moment with the patient themselves, just to make sure everything is as it appears, or to give that person a chance to speak for themselves outside of the caregiver being there. So that's one thing. But aside from that, as a family member, it's hard to imagine many situations where you shouldn't be welcome. Obviously, in an operating room, you're not going to be there, or in an ICU if they're doing a procedure at the bedside, or even a code. If the person needs to be resuscitated, oftentimes family members will be asked to leave the room just for logistical reasons. But I would say maybe one answer to your question is the most durable, the role that will get you in the most doors as a caregiver would be to be the person's healthcare proxy officially. If you're the durable power of attorney for healthcare, that means you have a duty, you are legally protected to speak on behalf of the patient. So it's really important that people's healthcare proxies are really in on the mix. So that may be the answer to the question you're looking for. If your mother is the healthcare proxy for your grandmother, then that should open the most doors possible. That is an official designation. Usually, though, a lot of us doctors, a lot of clinicians don't necessarily discern, if family clearly are involved, I would always look for them to be welcomed into the encounter one way or another, because the person may not be able to remember all the things that are discussed, et cetera, for those reasons. So oftentimes you don't need to make a big stink about being a family member or a primary caregiver versus the healthcare proxy. But the official designation to get you the most access would be to become that person's healthcare proxy, their durable power of attorney for healthcare. And come on, with all these guys, come on back if I didn't quite get your question, or if any of you else in the audience even better has something to add to these questions, please jump in, and we love that.
Okay, we had another question come in. This person said, I'm so tired, and everyone, family and friends, seems to want details all the time. I sometimes have trouble just putting sentences together because there's so many details. I want to accommodate them, but it's hard to find the time and energy.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. I'm having a little version of that. I mean, just the communications alone, never mind logistics, ADLs, just the communications. I mean, you need like a switchboard operator these days. Because I think we all have some expectations around, back when we just had a telephone and being together, well, we could write each other a letter, or we could call, or we could be there, and there were many other options. In some ways, that was a blessing. Right now, there's this feeling we can be connected to each other 24 hours a day, all over the world. Oh, it's great, but it's exhausting. So one thought would be, if you have a big enough sort of team to designate someone, okay, your job is communication hub. You just keep everyone posted. So one thought may be, if there's enough people around, as a division of labor, someone take the communications. At least you can rotate these roles. Another idea is to use websites like Caring Bridge is a well-known one. I mean, you can do this spontaneously on any of your social media things, of sort of a group communication, so you don't have to say the same thing a zillion times over. I struggle with that. It doesn't seem very intimate, doesn't seem very kind. I think a lot of us want to have that sort of inside scoop feeling, like, well, this is my mom, this is my uncle, I need to talk to you directly. And you're going to get a lot of that, and sometimes people won't be satisfied with a group post. But on some level, screw them. On some level, it's just like a lot of the role of caregiving is just being honest and real before the facts of the day. And if you're really involved as a caregiver, you're going to know how big that load is in ways you can't begin to communicate to people who just don't see it. I know this a lot. It would take, I can't even begin to tell you what I'm going through. And so therefore I'm not even going to try. And so this is a lesson for all of us too, is on the other receiving end is to be patient. If we're anxious to hear news about someone, just be patient. Assume things are happening that we just can't possibly understand in this moment, etc. There's a lot of patience and a lot of benefit of the doubt. So anyway, let's say, so we have this idea of sort of division of labor, so you don't get overwhelmed, someone handling communications. These Caring Bridge and other websites and social media-based group sort of announcements, get in the habit, say, hey guys, I'm gonna try to do this once every other day, or once a day, or 3 times a week, just to prepare expectations. I'm gonna update you on the latest, what's going on. In between which, please just know we're knee deep and we're doing okay. I'll reach out if I need you, or something like that. Expectation management can be very, very helpful. And also, again, the last thing is back to patience on the receiving end. It just may mean that we don't hear from each other for a few days or a week or whatever else. That may be difficult, but the whole dang thing's difficult. Okay, so you kind of pick your battles and you pick where your energies go. But you bring up such a good point where being a patient can be a full-time job, being a caregiver for a full-time job, and the expectations can get wild and the emotions can get wild. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, okay, did I triage well? Meaning, did I sort of prioritize things well? Did I do what I can? Great, I'm going to bed for the night. I'll try again tomorrow. And it's just got to be enough, because that's it. Just has to be enough. So it's imperfect as hell, but yes. Okay, any other questions, comments out there, guys?
Yeah, we had another one. I just wanted to add this to that last question too. When we were doing this with my mom, same thing that BJ's kind of talking about here. We just wrote out a large email that said, this is why you're not hearing from us in this way. Like, I am, I'm tired, I'm doing all this stuff, and just being very honest about, where we were, and that we would be writing, like you said, once a week or once every 2 weeks, and just setting that expectation, because of course you're doing so much, and this needs to fit into the way you're already living your life. And Valerie also said here that Caring Bridge is actually open to the public, so that might not be the best choice if you want more of an invited, closed community. And I didn't realize that was that way. So thank you for noting that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either. I thought you could select how you share, but great, thank you.
Also too. Yeah. Let me see. Someone else said start a Slack channel. There you go. Yes, not just for work, Slack channels. We did have another question come in here. It says, understanding that every case is unique, all things equal, if one can afford memory care at a facility, is that a better choice on balance than in-home care in late stage dementia?
I would say I don't have a objective answer for that question. I think it's so situation dependent. I think most of us sort of default to thinking that home is the right place for as long as possible, period, end of story. Not everyone actually feels that way. That's sort of the supposition in society these days, but actually not everyone feels that way, for one. For two, it may be, if promises were made to this person when they had their faculties about them that we'll stay at home no matter what. If promises were made, that may color this kind of decision. Or if you knew this person to be that home was everything to this person. So there are extenuating circumstances, of course, just in terms of what anyone might wish. But then there's a practical overlay. What's possible? You have to be illness just forces a sort of realism on things. And it just may not be tenable to be at home. So just be able to check the box, like we kept mom or dad or whoever at home, but when there was a suicide attempt, their mom and dad had, ultimately we couldn't care for them well, and their bed sores all over the place. And, it's not in other words, I would not fetishize this idea of being at home at all costs, period. So, I'm speaking in generalities here. And I would also encourage you, if you're thinking about like a move to a memory care place, which again, you're right, if you have the resources, these places are incredibly expensive. But if you're fortunate enough to have that as an option, You know, I that for some of us, there comes a time in the course of dementia, for example, like our case in point here, where the person may be so forgetful. There's sort of a hard zone. Early dementia, well, it's much like the rest of life. Middle years of dementia can be extra difficult because sometimes the person's fully there, sometimes not. Something they remember some things, not other things, and they're just enough connected to their past and the world around them to make being home extra important, just for purposes of orientation. We know that if someone with dementia is transferred to a hospital or nursing home into a foreign environment, it's extra discombobulating, extra difficult for that person to ground themselves, et cetera. And those moments of transition can be very, very difficult. It means extra think long and hard about going to the hospital or leaving the home in those situations if you can. So these are all sort of risks and reward. Every little thing has you have to get sort of gauge what's better or what's worse. There's not oftentimes going to be choosing between two difficult or crappy situations, and you're looking for almost like a harm reduction model. But then in the later stages of dementia, when the person is really their sort of their grip on the shared reality that you and I might delight in is really very far gone, and it doesn't matter in some ways if that person is at home or in a nursing home or a memory care facility or wherever else. It might not matter so much to them. And also, if they're so in the moment, sometimes a memory care center in particular, a good one, can be extra. It's not just a crappy alternative to home. It actually can be superior in that you've got a ton of people around to help. You've got other people who are in similar shoes, so a lot of relationships can form in real time and in sort of a day-to-day way. So in some ways, being in that sort of social environment, particularly if the person's still sort of socially engageable, being in a center may be not only okay enough if home's not working out, but maybe even better than home, not just for you as a caregiver, but for the patient. So there's just so many variables and so many moments in time where these things make more or less sense. So it's very hard to offer you a clear, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But I would say, if you can, I would entertain a move like this if you think it's coming sometime before everyone's burned out and sometimes before the care has really fallen off a cliff at home. So this is again where outside eyes can be really important. What's the situation? Okay, do we need more help here? Or are we doing okay? A doctor's visit can also help kind of assess that. PT, home health, home safety evaluations can be very helpful. Get someone's outside eyes on the home. A home safety evaluation, usually conducted by a physical therapist, can be requested through the physician. It can be a nice way to sort of make the home as safe as possible. That's really, really key. So I would say, as a rule, optimize home for as long as possible. Optimize it being, make sure that fall risks are mitigated, carpet edges are removed, lighting is good, getting on one floor, make home as manageable as possible for as long as possible. But when cracks are starting appearing, knowing that it's only going to get harder, dementia only gets worse. So if you're struggling now, you're only going to be struggling more in a month from now. So as these cracks start appearing, really start entertaining a non-emergent move to a memory care facility. It can be just the ticket. It can be a wonderfully caring thing to do. There's no shame in it. You hear a lot of people talk about, oh, in our country, in our culture, it's part of our culture to take care of each other to the end. Well, that's beautiful. That's great. Bless you. I mean, but in American society, the way it's rigged now, that's not necessarily possible for everybody. It's just so. I also want to mention there's no shame in going to a memory center, no shame in going to nursing home per se, not necessarily, not at all. It can be a very kind thing to do too. So anyway, I'm not sure if I answered your question at all on that one, but there's just a lot to say and a lot of variability, and there is no clear right or wrong. But please jump back in with more details if we want to talk that one out further.
Right, we've had a few more come in here. This person said, I have been a caregiver for our son. He's 23, who has recurrent Ewing sarcoma. He is currently cancer-free today. How do I, as a caregiver, when he wants it, and as his mom, who wants to support him, let go. This is so complex and he wants to handle his healthcare, but as a 23-year-old, he can miss appointments and be a 23-year-old, quote unquote, in this huge healthcare system. Do you have any pointers on how to give him space and let go as best I can?
Well, so hard. In that age, young adult issues, especially if your son's been dealing with cancer in the pediatric world, this transition to young adulthood is difficult in so many ways. The medical system, the pediatric world is one thing, the adult world is one thing, but we know it's not like when you turn 18 in an hour, now you're an adult and everything changes. The medical system kind of treats it that way, but of course that's not how it plays out. So your son may be 23 and he may be hyper mature given all that he's gone through in some ways, but that also may have come at the development of other things along the way, just being in a hospital all the time and being out of the flow of life and of his peers in some way. So just developmentally knowing where your son is and how prepared he is to care for himself and make certain decisions. That's very hard to say, but young adulthood, cancers, illnesses of young adulthood are particularly difficult for all these reasons, both for the patient, also the medical system, and for you as family and caregivers. So what to do? Not knowing your son, I think it is important. I think part of independence, part of being alone is the right to fail, is the right to fall, is the right to screw up, and that must be, I would imagine, one of the most difficult things as a parent to just, part of letting go is in a sense watching, at some point he's going to miss an appointment or maybe miss a treatment, and it can feel horrible to watch someone you love, fail. Sorry for that language. But make decisions that aren't necessarily on their best, for their best sake, etc. So one thought would be to say, hey son, let's sit down and talk about this. Just like name this, just like we're talking now. You've been through so much, so much, and there are other things maybe by now you haven't learned quite yet. I don't know. I'm your mom. I'm gonna love you no matter what. And I hear you wanting independence, and I want to give it to you, and it's going to be hard as hell for me to let go. Just name it. He may be able to support you a little bit in that. So maybe one would be just naming all of these things, putting them out on a table, and say, maybe it's worth a sort of a trial. Say, hey, honey, why don't we let's try one way. We've got some transitions to make here. Maybe for the next 3 months or something like that, you tell me. I'm going to only take my cues from you, but I'd also like to be able to, know what's going on with your medical situation. If you don't mind, I would like if you tell you, as you're an adult now, son, but if you let your doctor know, I would like you to let your doctor know that I'm able to receive medical information. As an adult, he needs that official permission from you. He needs to give you that permission, technically speaking. Otherwise, it's a HIPAA violation. So one thing to negotiate here would be that you get to have access to his medical information. You may or may not go for that, but that may be one way for you to get what you need and to give him what he needs. And then otherwise, I would say like a trial period of certain one way of communication. I'm going to totally leave you alone for whatever. And then in 3 months, can we review where you are, what appointments were missed, and see how we might change this? And all the way I'll know, you can call me back in any time and we'll revisit this, or, I'm here for you anytime. Whatever it is, sort of committing to that reassurance and that love, naming the logistical difficulties of pulling back, and having some escape plan here, having some plan to retweak the way this is all working in some short order if it's not going well. But I do think part of your job here is going to be actually letting him make his own mistakes and make his own triumphs too. But there may be moments you're going to have to watch him fall. Oh, I don't have to pretend that's easy. But anyway, I wonder if anyone else on the call here has some more advice for you, more specific, or some thoughts. And please do come back if I sound like I'm full of water. I do not envy that situation. Very tricky.
Okay, we've had a few more questions come in. So this person said, recently with my mom, I was not allowed in the hospital with her. Do you have any recommendations on how to force the issue within a hospital system?
Well, so not all bets are off-ish with COVID. It's really thrown a wrench in the works for all this sort of flows of communication and visiting hours and all this stuff. most hospitals and most health systems by now have come up with their own policies for visitation. As I was saying earlier, the most protected official role is if you are the durable power of attorney for healthcare. If you are the person's surrogate or proxy, that is an official designation. You have to be in the loop to make decisions on behalf of this person, et cetera. That's your most leverage. But even still, there may be policies that preclude you from being present for this or that situation in the hospital, but should at least get you access to talking with the doctors in a routine and the nurses in a regular way and getting updates, even if you can't be there in person. It's not asking too much to get routine updates about what's going on. So that's one thing. But I started to say, I think by now, most hospitals, most health systems will have their own policy around visitation. It may be one visitor at a time for a certain amount of time, et cetera. But if you're getting just a sort of stiff-armed again and again, I would certainly ask to see what is their visitation policy and how do they decide who and when someone can visit, who can visit and when. So that would be one start. And patient relations is most hospitals will have an ombudsman or a patient relations department to call if you're getting mixed signals or no one's communicating with you. I would register a complaint quickly, formally, make sure that that's noted and say, this is not adequate, this is not good enough. We need better. Getting the ombudsman or the patient relations person on your case, on your team in that way. If it's really getting bleak and things are happening and it's starting to feel really nefarious, there are a lot of health systems will have an ethics team, and you may request an ethics consultation if it's getting down to that level. That's possible. That should be, generally speaking, most always possible too. So different levels of ways to run this up the flagpole, but I would start with asking for their official policy and getting clear, and then asking if it's still inadequate or if you still have questions about it. Be in touch first with the team, the medical team, to try to talk it through. If you're not getting anywhere, go to patient relations. If you're not really getting anywhere, ask for an ethics consult. And again, remember, just even if you can't be there in person, the flow of info, you should be able to get updates routinely about what's going on in a way you can virtually be there. Yeah, please come back. I'd be curious to know what you're hearing from people as you try to visit her in the hospital. What kind of excuses, what kind of pushback you're getting. I'd be interested. I'd be curious. I mean, we can talk it out.
Okay, we have another one. It's got a little bit of a story, so I'll just read it out and then get to the question. This person said, my dad has advanced Parkinson's and dementia, and my mom is his primary caregiver. I am there a few days a week to help. He's at the stage where so much of the day is spent dealing with his bowel and urinary incontinence. My dad is aware enough that he is self-conscious and doesn't want me as his daughter to have to help him with this, but it's the one thing that would really help out my mom. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how to navigate this.
So did I hear right? So navigating this would be, so the person writing the question, you are a child, these are your parents, and the question gets at how to help. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again, Sonia?
Oh yeah, no problem. So, taking care of your father with bowel and urinary incontinence, and it's your dad, and dad is conscious of what's happening and isn't fully comfortable with daughter taking care of those needs, but it's the one thing that would really help out mom, who is primary caregiver, just that change in relationships. So
Right.
Wondering on how to maybe navigate this.
Gotcha. Well, if there are resources, a lot of us can accept help from a professional in ways we can't receive help from a loved one. So if there are resources available, one idea would be to hire a home health aide, for so many hours of the day, to take on explicitly these very roles, to free you up and your mom up to do other things and to be other things. So that'd be, and I don't mean to be glib about that, because that can cost a fair amount of money, can add up. But usually $20 to $30 range, you can hire a home health aide by the hour, and maybe get in a rhythm, and the aide is there for a certain number of hours a day. But of course, toileting is something that, 24 incontinence issues are 24 hours a day. So if there's a rhythm to this, a period where it would relieve, so there's some need for your mom and you to be, and your dad to kind of work together one way or another, but every day you can count on an aide being there for 3 hours or 4 hours to really sort of to be there for bowel movements. For bowel care can be much more intimate. So you might be able to kind of cobble something together with professionals. Otherwise, if there is a person that your dad is willing to accept help from, maybe it's someone who's not, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's easier for him to accept from a friend than a family member. So exploring with your dad, saying, hey, I know you don't want me doing this, but someone's got to do this, so let's figure out a way. I know this is difficult in ways I can't barely imagine, and I hear you, Papa, and I want to honor your wishes, but you also need care and support. So how do you want to do this? See where you can give him some agency. Here too, sometimes, I'll hear myself say this again, sometimes a lot of us, by virtue of our pride or whatever it is, sometimes I will need to fail at something a few times. I will need to cross the line to find the line. It may be that your dad needs to have a period where he's trying to do all this himself, won't let anybody in, and it's just getting too hard. He's either he's having accidents much of the time, and it may need to get hard enough for him until he accepts help. That's a really hard message, and that means for you and your mom sort of just watching pain play out. But oftentimes that's all you can do. Your dad has his wits about him. It's his decision. So sometimes just being loving until things get bad enough, and then maybe he'll accept a new level of help. Maybe one route here, but communication will be key. And it may be also that he may not know how difficult this is on his wife, on your mom. And I would imagine that your dad would be very moved if you sat down with your dad and said, Dad, mom's trying her best to do all these things, but I'm really worried about her. She's not going to show you this, but she's really struggling X, Y, and Z. We need help. We're going to overwhelm mom, and mom's going to start suffering. I know you don't want that. We don't want that. So can we please come up with a plan B or something like that? So sometimes people will not accept help for themselves, but as soon as they know a loved one is being affected, that may be the way in. I noticed that with a certain generation of folks, folks who grew up around the Depression. It's very common. I don't need help. I want any help. But the second you invoke family suffering, well, that gets them into a new place. So those are some thoughts. Again, please, anybody else here in the call, jump on in if you have other ideas.
All right, I think we've got time here for a follow-up question. This is from the same person who's hoping to navigate care for her 23-year-old son. She said, I feel more anxiety about his illness than I think he knows. He just had his first 3-month scan after finishing radiation in August. How does a caregiver transition through the survivor window?
One word, lumpily, clunkily. It's not, you named it. I mean, it's a transition zone. His health is transitioning. He's transitioning just developmentally as a young man. Your role as mom, never mind cancers, letting go to young adulthood. I mean, there's just transitions all over the place. And transitions, especially along these lines, are just clunky. So one thing is just prepare your expectations. It's going to be lurchy. There's going to be friction. There's going to be times where you're overreaching, sometimes where it's procedure underreaching. And there's going to be plenty of times where you just don't know what the heck the scene is or what your son's feeling. So that's point one, not acknowledgement, give yourself that space, manage your expectations. It will be clunky for a while, for months, maybe a year, who knows? Again, just to name that, and this you may be able to partner with your son a little bit here and talk that out and share that. The transition for him too, of course. The degree to which you guys can be partners with each other as you help each other move into these new roles, that's ideal. Depending on your dynamic and the capacity there, that may or may not be possible. But you're going to need to be it's going to be important for you to get clear on your needs versus his needs. And those two things overlap in so many ways, but not always. So looking for where you're just projecting fear onto him, being your own self-awareness is going to be really, really important here. Am I freaking out right now because I'm just freaking out because I just is untenable for me? Or am I freaking out because something's wrong with my son or something's going bad? I mean, reading your antenna is going to be really, really important. Self-awareness, really, really key. Am I projecting pain onto my son's situation here? Is this my stuff or his stuff? It's not always so discreet, but ask yourself that question pretty regularly, because they beg different responses. And then support groups, other mothers, whether in the health system your son's been getting care, there may be support groups for parents who have gone through similar things. That can be invaluable to have a place and people who've been in these shoes to talk with. Can be really, really key. So reach out to peers. I think that's really important. And also look for where this situation, maybe a lot of your friends, I don't know, let's see, but a lot of what you're describing are normal transitions for a loving mother and a young son becoming a young adult. In other words, a lot of the things you may be looking at have nothing to do with cancer, maybe certainly colored by cancer, but there's going to be there's a more generalized thing that you're going through too. So maybe your friends have something to offer too. That's a little, I say that with some consternation because if your friends can't quite, if there are meaningful distinctions between what you're going through and what they're going through with their kids, their advice or their counsel may fall short. But at least maybe you can be seen and heard by your friends. Never mind counsel, but like that, back to that bearing witness. Asking your son to appreciate all that you're going through may be asking too much in a way. Actually, maybe that's not the right thing to do right now for him. Sharing what you can with him, but also letting him leave the nest. And so, that may be some of your emotions are processed elsewhere with a friend, with a spouse, with a lover, with whatever, with whomever, with the doctor, with the nurse, with peers. So getting your own support through this, venting where you can, and being very careful with your projections is certainly key. But otherwise, expect a bumpy ride. It's just going to be, you're going to over lurch, under lurch. It's just going to be clunky. That's kind of the way it is. And again, if you can partner with your son, then all this becomes the stuff of the bond. And certainly once you guys are through these transitions, these are going to be some very rich memories for you to look back on. Remember that time when I was so awkwardly treating you like you were 15 when you were 23? But you got to get through this to get to that reflection zone. But meanwhile, awkwardness, welcome, clunkiness, welcome, pain, inevitable, a sense of incompetency, inevitable, So welcome it all, see and work with it as best you can. It's like I say, it's going to be tricky and it's going to be beautiful.
Okay, on that note, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So do we want to head to the question or we can close?
Is there one more question, did you say?
The question at the end of the slides.
Oh, yeah. Okay, here we go, everybody. Let me put us back on the air. All right, as we do, we end these things with just a provocation to you guys. We'd love to hear from you. These help us as an organization at Mettle get smarter about what people need. And it's also just interesting too. So anyway, we'd love to know, what type of information do you need most in your caregiver role? What are you looking for that you can't find out there? What does the pamphlet that you get from the cancer center or whatever not cover? What do the calls to the doctor's office not cover? These are the things we'd love to know, because at Mettle we are really trying to build a library of resources to be there for people in ways that they need. So we'd love to know, and email us, let us know. All right, anything else, Sonia?
No, we got through all the questions. Thanks again for being here, everyone. Wishing all of you a good weekend.
Yeah, amen, guys. Thanks for being here as always, and all the best to you. Enjoy the weekend. Bye-bye.